I met Fiona during our college years. She was the kind of woman who lit up a room, a vibrant, confident personality that everyone seemed drawn to. I was no exception. We married young, full of dreams and plans, and for a long time, life was good. I had a steady job, and Fiona was just as driven, chasing her ambitions in marketing. Our family grew when our 2 children came into the picture, and though things got more hectic, I thought we were happy. Fiona always had a way of charming her way through life, and I took pride in being her partner, supporting her through everything. Sure, we had the usual ups and downs, but nothing that seemed out of the ordinary. Yet, looking back, there were signs, little moments that didn't quite sit right. Her late-night texts, unexplained absences, and the way she seemed to drift further away from me emotionally. At first, I chalked it up to stress. Life was busy. We both had our hands full balancing work and family. But a part of me knew something was changing. One night, as I was tucking the kids into bed, Fiona came home late again. When I asked how her day was, she seemed distracted, brushing me off with a vague answer about meetings running over. She didn't look me in the eye. That's when the doubt started creeping in. Little did I know, those small cracks were about to widen into a chasm that would upend everything I thought I knew about my life. Fiona had always been the kind of person who thrived on attention, something I admired about her when we first met. She was magnetic, the kind of woman people naturally gravitated toward. Over the years, I noticed how much she enjoyed being at the center of things. Whether it was her coworkers laughing at her stories during office parties or the way she could effortlessly connect with strangers at social gatherings. At first, I thought it was harmless, even endearing. But gradually, her need for validation seemed to grow into something else entirely. She became more focused on appearances, spending longer hours in front of the mirror before heading out to work or to one of the countless networking events her company hosted. It felt excessive, but I tried not to overthink it. I wanted to trust her, even when her behavior started to raise questions in the back of my mind. Carl entered her life through her job. She mentioned him casually at first, just another colleague, a new hire. I remember her describing him as ambitious and smart, someone who seemed to have a knack for charming people. She praised his ideas during dinner one night, saying how refreshing it was to work with someone so full of energy. Back then, I didn't think much of it. I figured it was normal to admire someone at work. But over time, Carl's name began to come up more often. She would tell me about their meetings, their collaborative projects, how they stayed late working on presentations together. She sounded excited, animated in a way I hadn't seen in years. While I was proud that she was excelling in her career, I couldn't ignore the strange gut feeling that something wasn't right. Fiona began working later and later, often texting to say she'd be home late because of urgent deadlines or last-minute meetings with Carl. Her stories started to feel rehearsed, as if she were trying too hard to explain herself. I tried to be supportive, convincing myself that this was just a rough patch and that her dedication to work was temporary. But there were small details that didn't add up. One weekend, she claimed to be attending a work seminar out of town. I stayed home with the kids, juggling their school projects and playdates, while Fiona was supposedly focusing on career growth. When she returned, she seemed distant, as though she had left a part of herself somewhere else. She began dressing differently, more stylish, more deliberate. At first, I thought she was just updating her wardrobe, but it felt calculated, like she was dressing for someone other than herself. She even started wearing a new perfume, a floral scent I didn't recognize. When I commented on it, she brushed it off, saying she was trying something new. Looking back, I can see how blind I was to the bigger picture. I ignored the small things, the way she always had her phone on her, the sudden notifications she would hurriedly swipe away, and the odd moments when her mood would shift without explanation. I convinced myself that my doubts were nothing more than paranoia, a reflection of my own insecurities. But deep down I knew. I could feel her slipping away, as though she were moving towards someone else, someone who made her feel alive in a way I apparently no longer could. Carl was becoming a bigger part of her life, and whether she admitted it or not, I could see the connection forming between them. It wasn't until I found myself sitting alone in our bedroom one night, staring at the empty side of the bed, that I allowed myself to admit the truth. Fiona's late nights, her renewed energy, the way she talked about Carl with a light in her eyes, it wasn't just work. It was something more, something she was keeping from me. Still, I tried to push those thoughts aside. I told myself I was overreacting, that Fiona would never betray me. But as the weeks went on, her distance grew, and the gnawing suspicion in my chest became impossible to ignore. The unease in my gut wouldn't leave me. I tried to brush it off as paranoia, but it gnawed at me every time Fiona came home late or disappeared into the bathroom with her phone. There were too many unanswered questions, too many moments that didn't sit right. Still, I tried to be the husband who trusted his wife, the man who refused to let doubt ruin his marriage. But there's a limit to how long you can lie to yourself. One night, after she had gone to bed, I found myself staring at her phone on the nightstand. I had never invaded her privacy before. It wasn't who I was. But that night, the weight of everything, the missed calls, the late nights, her strange detachment, was too much. I picked up the phone, my hands shaking. At first, I couldn't bring myself to open it. I sat there for what felt like hours, battling with myself. Finally, I unlocked it using her usual passcode, one I had known for years. What I found made my stomach drop. There were messages, hundreds of them, buried in a chat with someone named C. It didn't take long to figure out who that was. Carl. Their conversations were filled with inside jokes, compliments, and plans to meet up. They weren't explicit. She had been careful enough not to leave anything too damning, but it was clear they were more than just co-workers. They exchanged texts late into the night, long after Fiona would tell me she was too tired to talk. There were photos, too, selfies of her smiling in a way I hadn't seen in years, wearing that new perfume, her hair styled just right. I sat there in the dim light of our bedroom, scrolling through the evidence of their growing connection. My mind raced, flipping between anger and disbelief. How could she do this? How long had this been going on? Was it physical, or was it just emotional? Did it even matter? The next day, I couldn't focus on anything. I went through the motions with the kids, took them to school, and tried to keep my face calm, but inside, I was unraveling. The woman I had shared my life with, the mother of my children, had been hiding something from me. I started paying closer attention to everything. I noticed how often she laughed at her texts, the way she always took her phone with her, even to the bathroom. She became more guarded, more cautious, as if she knew I was watching. It confirmed my suspicions. There was something she didn't want me to see. Eventually, I decided to dig deeper. I hated myself for doing it, but I needed to know the truth. I checked our shared bank statements and found charges for expensive dinners at restaurants I'd never been to. There were hotel bookings under her name, timed perfectly with those business seminars she attended. The final blow came when I found her work planner, carelessly left open on the dining table one evening. It wasn't much, just a scribbled note about a meeting, but it was in a handwriting I didn't recognize. Friday, 8 p.m. Carlton Suites. I sat at that table for hours, staring at those words. Carlton Suites. I knew that place. It was a hotel just outside of town, the kind of place that catered to couples looking for privacy. My chest tightened as the reality sank in. This wasn't just flirting or emotional betrayal. This was physical. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. The memories of our life together played on a loop in my head, taunting me with the stark contrast between who Fiona used to be and who she had become. I felt foolish for not seeing it sooner, for believing her lies. When morning came, I decided I couldn't confront her yet. I needed more than circumstantial evidence. I needed something concrete, undeniable. Something she couldn't manipulate or twist to make me look like the paranoid husband. I told myself that this was about protecting my family, about getting the truth so I could decide what to do next. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. I needed to face the truth, no matter how much it hurt. And so, I started planning. The days that followed were a blur of tension and quiet observation. Fiona had no idea how closely I was watching her now, how every excuse, every unexplained absence, was being scrutinized. I felt like a stranger in my own life, drifting through the routine of work and parenting while a storm brewed just beneath the surface. She was getting bolder. There were moments when her lies were so obvious they almost felt like insults. One evening, she claimed she had to attend a late meeting downtown, but her makeup was done with a precision I hadn't seen in years. She even wore that perfume, the one she only seemed to wear for her work events. I watched her leave, her heels clicking against the driveway, and I wondered how much of her life had become a performance. I started keeping a record of everything: her late nights, the cryptic texts she tried to hide, the odd charges on our credit card statements. It wasn't about revenge. It was about clarity. I needed to piece together the truth, one lie at a time. One Friday, she told me she'd be home late again, another emergency meeting. Her voice was casual, practiced, but her eyes wouldn't meet mine. After she left, I waited a few minutes and then followed her. I didn't want to. Every fiber of my being told me this was a line I shouldn't cross, but I had to know. I stayed far enough behind so she wouldn't notice, my heart pounding with every turn she took. When she pulled into the parking lot of the Carlton Suites, it felt like all the air had been sucked out of the car. I watched as she got out, smoothing her dress before heading inside. It was Carl, I was sure of it. I couldn't bring myself to follow her inside. Instead, I sat there in the car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The betrayal was real now, not just something I had imagined or suspected. It was flesh and blood, happening right in front of me. When she came home that night, she was glowing. Her excuses were rehearsed, but I didn't bother questioning her. I had stopped asking questions because I couldn't stomach her lies anymore. Every answer she gave was like another cut, and I was bleeding out. I began to notice how easily she twisted reality, how she shifted blame to make herself look like the victim. If I asked about her late nights, she would accuse me of being controlling. If I expressed concern, she'd say I was paranoid, that I was smothering her. It was a kind of gaslighting I hadn't experienced before, and it left me questioning my own sanity. Fiona also began to weave a narrative with our friends and family, planting seeds of doubt about me. She painted herself as the hard-working, ambitious wife married to a husband who didn't understand her drive. I could see it in the way people looked at me during gatherings, the sympathetic smiles, the casual comments about work stress, and how I needed to give Fiona some space. I was becoming the villain in her story, a role she was crafting with precision. It was infuriating to watch her manipulate the people closest to us, turning them into unwitting allies in her charade. I wanted to scream the truth at them, to show them the evidence I had gathered, but I held back. It wasn't time yet. Her lies weren't just about protecting herself, they were about control. She wanted to keep me in the dark, to maintain the upper hand. And for a while it worked. I felt trapped, isolated, unable to share the burden of what I was going through. But her web of lies couldn't hold forever. The more she spun, the more tangled it became. There were contradictions in her stories, inconsistencies she couldn't explain away. I started to notice the cracks in her performance, the moments when her mask would slip, revealing the guilt and desperation underneath. It wasn't long before I realized I couldn't let this continue. She was dragging me down, pulling me into her chaos, and I refused to let her take me with her. The time for confrontation was coming, and I needed to be ready. Fiona's lies were her shield, but I had the truth on my side. And soon, she would have nowhere to hide. The day I decided to confront Fiona started like any other, mundane, predictable, but with an undercurrent of tension only I seemed to feel. I spent the morning with the kids, trying to keep things as normal as possible, all while preparing for what I knew had to happen. The evidence I'd gathered, the messages, the hotel bookings, the receipts, sat in a folder tucked away in my briefcase. By then, it wasn't just about confirming what I already knew. It was about taking back control. Her lies, her manipulation, her betrayal, they had taken enough from me. It was time to put an end to it. That evening, Fiona came home later than usual. She breezed through the door with the same casual energy she always had after her meetings. I couldn't help but notice the faint scent of her perfume, the subtle touch-up on her makeup. She didn't even glance at me as she walked past, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. I waited until the kids were in bed, their laughter still echoing in my ears as I sat alone in the living room. Fiona joined me shortly after, settling onto the couch with a glass of wine like nothing was wrong. I studied her for a moment, trying to reconcile the woman sitting in front of me with the person I now knew her to be. I didn't raise my voice or lose my temper. Instead, I calmly told her I needed to talk. Her body stiffened slightly, a subtle sign that she knew something was coming. She tried to brush it off, claiming she was too tired to have a serious conversation, but I didn't let her deflect this time. When I placed the folder on the coffee table, she froze. For a split second, her confident demeanor cracked, replaced by something raw. Fear, maybe, or panic. I opened the folder and began laying out the evidence piece by piece. The receipts. The messages. The hotel bookings. The photos. Every lie she had told unraveled in that moment, laid bare for her to see. She didn't say a word at first, her eyes darting from the papers to me and back again. Finally, she broke the silence, but it wasn't with an apology or an admission of guilt. Instead, she tried to turn it around on me, claiming I had invaded her privacy, that I was the one ruining our marriage by spying on her. Her words were sharp, desperate, as if she thought she could still regain control of the situation. But I didn't let her. I stayed calm, repeating the facts, refusing to let her twist the narrative. She tried every tactic she could think of: denial, anger, tears, but the evidence was undeniable. I could see the walls closing in around her, the realization sinking in that she couldn't talk her way out of this. Eventually, she admitted it. Not all of it, of course. She downplayed the extent of her betrayal, claiming it was just a mistake, something that got out of hand. She blamed the long hours, the stress, even me, saying I hadn't been there for her the way Carl had. Hearing those words was like a punch to the gut. She was still trying to justify it, to make it seem like what she had done was somehow excusable. But there was no excuse for this. She had betrayed not just me, but our family, our children. I told her as much, my voice steady even as my heart felt like it was breaking. I laid out what would happen next. The separation, the custody arrangement, the steps we would take to dismantle the life we had built together. She protested, of course, insisting we could work through it, that we could fix this. But I knew better. Fiona wasn't sorry for what she had done. She was sorry she had been caught. And there was no coming back from that. By the end of the night, the house was silent. Fiona retreated to the guest bedroom, slamming the door behind her, while I sat alone in the living room, staring at the remnants of the life we once had. I thought I would feel relief, maybe even a sense of victory, but all I felt was emptiness. The truth was out now, and there was no going back. Fiona's lies had finally caught up with her, and the fallout was just beginning. The days following the confrontation were a haze of tense silences and unspoken words. Fiona tried to carry on as if nothing had changed, putting on a facade of normalcy for the kids, but the cracks in her performance were glaringly obvious. I could see it in the way she avoided looking at me, the way her voice wavered when she spoke to the children, trying to sound upbeat. I had already contacted a lawyer. It was the hardest call I'd ever made, but I knew it was necessary. Fiona's betrayal wasn't just a blow to me, it had shattered the foundation of our family. My priority now was protecting the kids and ensuring they were shielded from as much of this chaos as possible. The lawyer was thorough, laying out the steps I needed to take. We discussed custody arrangements, financial implications, and the steps required to gather documentation. The process felt cold and clinical, but I appreciated the clarity. It gave me a sense of control in a situation where everything else felt like it was spiraling. Fiona, for her part, didn't make things easy. When I told her I had filed for divorce, she reacted with a mix of shock and indignation, as though she couldn't believe I would go through with it. She accused me of being impulsive, of throwing away everything we had built together. But I didn't back down. I told her that trust, once broken, couldn't be pieced back together with empty promises and half-hearted apologies. She cried, of course, but her tears didn't move me. I had spent too many nights staring at the ceiling, replaying every lie, every deceitful word, to let her emotions sway me now. The custody battle was inevitable. Fiona argued that she deserved to keep the kids full-time, painting herself as the better parent despite the evidence to the contrary. I presented my case calmly and methodically, laying out the neglect, the missed school events, the nights she had left me to handle everything while she pursued her affair. It was painful, dredging up every misstep, every moment where she had put her own desires above her responsibilities. But I knew I had to do it. This wasn't about punishing Fiona, it was about protecting our children from a parent who had shown she was willing to put them second. When the court documents were finally filed, Fiona's demeanor shifted. She became cold, almost combative, lashing out at me whenever we were alone. She accused me of turning the kids against her, of trying to destroy her life. In her eyes, I was the villain now, the man who had ruined her carefully constructed facade. The turning point came during the custody evaluation. The court-appointed evaluator met with both of us separately, as well as with the kids. I had prepared myself for this, laying out the facts without letting emotion cloud my presentation. Fiona, on the other hand, seemed unprepared for the level of scrutiny. Her attempts to spin the narrative fell flat, and it was clear to the evaluator that her priorities had been skewed. When the decision finally came, it was both a relief and a heartbreak. I was awarded primary custody, with Fiona granted visitation rights. The judge cited her neglect and the instability she had introduced into our lives. I should have felt vindicated, but all I felt was an aching sadness, for what we had lost, for the family we could have been. Fiona's reaction was explosive. She accused me of manipulating the system, of using the kids as pawns. She stormed out of the courtroom that day, leaving me to gather the children and take them home. I watched her walk away, her shoulders hunched, and felt nothing but exhaustion. The fallout extended beyond the legal system. Word of Fiona's affair spread quickly through our community, thanks in part to her own carelessness. Mutual friends began to distance themselves from her, some cutting ties completely. Even her family, who had always supported her unconditionally, expressed their disappointment. I saw the isolation take its toll on her. Fiona, who had once been the life of every party, now moved through the world like a ghost. Carl, unsurprisingly, had disappeared from her life as soon as things got messy. She was left to pick up the pieces of the life she had so recklessly destroyed. But I didn't let myself dwell on her downfall. My focus was on rebuilding, on creating a stable and loving environment for the kids. We settled into a routine: school drop-offs, soccer practices, family movie nights. It wasn't easy, but it was ours. There were moments when the weight of it all threatened to overwhelm me. Nights when the silence of the house pressed down on me, reminding me of what I had lost. But then I would look at the kids, laughing, playing, thriving, and I knew I had made the right choice. Fiona's absence from their daily lives was a wound that would take time to heal, but I was determined to fill the void with love and consistency. She had chosen her path, and now it was up to me to guide us through the aftermath. In the end, Fiona's lies had cost her everything: her marriage, her family, her reputation. And while the scars of her betrayal would remain, I found solace in the life I was building, one step at a time. The first few months after the court's decision were a whirlwind of adjustment. Life as a single parent was exhausting in ways I hadn't fully anticipated. Every morning started with the rush of breakfast, school drop-offs, and juggling my work schedule to make sure I could pick the kids up on time. Evenings were spent helping with homework, cooking dinner, and tucking them into bed. I was running on fumes most days, but despite the chaos, I found a strange sense of peace. Without Fiona's unpredictable presence, our home felt different, calmer, steadier. The kids seemed to sense it too. At first, they asked about their mom constantly, and I made sure to answer with as much kindness as I could muster, never wanting to poison their relationship with her. But as time went on, their questions grew less frequent, replaced by a focus on the new routines we were creating together. I hadn't realized how much of myself I'd lost in the years leading up to Fiona's betrayal. I'd spent so much energy trying to make her happy, trying to hold our family together, that I'd neglected parts of my own life. Now, with the dust settling, I found myself reconnecting with old friends, picking up hobbies I'd abandoned, and rediscovering who I was outside of my role as a husband and father. It wasn't easy. There were nights when loneliness crept in, whispering doubts about whether I'd made the right choices. Memories of Fiona would surface unexpectedly. Moments from the early days of our relationship when everything felt perfect. But those memories were always followed by the sting of betrayal, a reminder of why I couldn't go back. Fiona's presence in the kids' lives became sporadic at best. She kept her visitation schedule for the first month, but soon the excuses started. She was too busy with work or not feeling well. The kids noticed, of course, though they didn't say much. I could see the disappointment in their eyes, the way they tried to cover it up with forced smiles. One evening, after Fiona canceled yet another visit, I found my daughter sitting quietly in her room, staring at a photo of the four of us from a vacation years ago. I sat down beside her and asked if she wanted to talk. She didn't say much, just shrugged and said she missed how things used to be. Her words hit me harder than I expected. I wanted to tell her that it wasn't her fault, that nothing she could have done would have changed what happened. Instead, I just hugged her tightly, silently promising myself that I would do everything I could to make up for what Fiona had taken from us. Over time, the kids and I began to settle into a rhythm. We made new traditions: Friday night pizza and movies, weekend trips to the park, homemade pancakes on Sunday mornings. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours, and that was enough. Work became an anchor for me, a place where I could focus my energy and feel productive. My colleagues, many of whom had known me during the height of my marital struggles, were supportive in quiet, meaningful ways. A simple "How are you holding up?" or a pat on the back during a tough day reminded me that I wasn't as alone as I sometimes felt. What surprised me most was how the community rallied around me. Neighbors who I'd barely spoken to before began offering to help, bringing over meals, watching the kids when I needed a break. It was humbling and, at times, overwhelming. For so long, I'd felt isolated, but now I saw how many people cared. Fiona, meanwhile, seemed to be unraveling. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she was struggling to keep her job and that her once close circle of friends had largely distanced themselves. Carl, of course, was long gone, leaving her to face the fallout on her own. Part of me felt pity for her. Despite everything she'd done, it was painful to see the woman I once loved reduced to this. But I knew I couldn't let her problems consume me anymore. She had made her choices, and now she had to live with the consequences. As the months passed, I began to notice a change in myself. The bitterness that had consumed me after the betrayal started to fade, replaced by something softer: acceptance, maybe even hope. I found joy in the small moments: the sound of the kids laughing, the satisfaction of a productive day at work, the peace of a quiet evening alone with my thoughts. One day, while sorting through old boxes in the garage, I stumbled across a stack of photos from our wedding. For a moment, I considered throwing them away, but something stopped me. Instead, I placed them back in the box and tucked it away in the corner. They were a part of my story, after all. Painful, yes, but also a reminder of how far I'd come. Life wasn't perfect, but it was moving forward. The wounds Fiona had left were still there, but they were healing, slowly but surely. And as I looked at my kids, thriving, resilient, and full of life, I realized that despite everything, we were going to be okay. A year passed before I fully allowed myself to breathe again. Looking back, it felt like an eternity and a blink of an eye at the same time. The chaos Fiona had unleashed had turned my life upside down, but somehow I had come out of it stronger, even if the scars would always be there. The kids were the reason I kept going, no question about it. Their resilience inspired me. They had lost a part of their world, yet they adapted in ways that left me both proud and heartbroken. I could see how much they missed the family we once had, even if they never said it aloud. But I also saw them thrive in our new normal, a world filled with structure, love, and, most importantly, trust. Every so often, Fiona would try to reach out, usually through a long, rambling email or an out-of-the-blue phone call. Her words were full of regret and promises to do better, but they always felt hollow. She was stuck in the past, unable or unwilling to take full responsibility for what she had done. I answered her less and less as time went on. Not out of anger. I had long since let go of the burning fury I'd felt in the beginning, but because I knew that engaging with her wouldn't bring anything positive to our lives. She was a shadow of the person I had once loved, and I had no space left for her in the future I was building. Our divorce had been finalized months earlier, and with it came a kind of closure I hadn't expected. Signing those papers wasn't just an end to our marriage. It was a beginning for me. A clean slate, a chance to live life on my terms without the weight of her betrayal hanging over me. There were still moments of grief, though. It wasn't just the loss of Fiona as a partner, but the life we had envisioned together. The vacations we'd planned, the milestones we'd imagined sharing as a family. All of it was gone now, replaced by something unfamiliar. But with that unfamiliarity came opportunity. I found myself looking at life differently, with a renewed appreciation for the little things I had taken for granted. Morning walks with the kids, a peaceful evening with a book, the laughter of old friends. These were the moments that reminded me of what truly mattered. The house, once filled with tension and secrets, had become a sanctuary. I poured myself into making it a home again, repainting rooms, planting flowers in the garden, and even letting the kids pick out some ridiculous decorations for their rooms. It was messy and imperfect, but it felt alive in a way it hadn't in years. Friends began nudging me to get back out there, to meet new people and start fresh, as they like to say. I wasn't ready, not yet. The idea of opening my heart again, of trusting someone the way I had trusted Fiona, felt too raw. For now, I was content focusing on the life I had with my kids, the three of us against the world. Still, there were glimmers of possibility. A kind smile from a coworker, a casual conversation with a fellow parent at the kids' soccer game. Small reminders that the world hadn't closed its doors to me. I didn't know if I was ready to walk through them yet, but it was enough to know they were there. One evening, after the kids had gone to bed, I found myself sitting on the back porch with a cup of coffee, staring out at the stars. The quiet was soothing, the kind that lets you hear your own thoughts without the chaos of the day crowding them out. I thought about everything that had happened. Fiona, Carl, the betrayal, the anger, the sadness. It felt distant now, like a storm that had passed, leaving behind a clearer sky. I realized I wasn't the same man I had been before. I was stronger, wiser, and, most importantly, free. The scars would always be there, reminders of the pain I had endured. But they didn't define me. They were just part of the story, a story that was still being written. As I sat there, listening to the faint hum of crickets in the yard, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Hope for the future, for the life I was building with my kids, for the person I was becoming. Fiona's betrayal had taken so much from me, but it hadn't destroyed me. It hadn't destroyed us. We were still here, still standing, still moving forward. And for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to take the next step, whatever that might be.